has been brought to you by the letter P.
All right, so we are up to my favorite letter of the alphabet, P. And why would P be my favorite letter? Well, if you're studying for the SATs or just generally trying to show off, P has a lot to offer you, like pusillanimous, or perfidious, or parsimonious, or pulchritudinous. And for those of you who can comment first with the definitions of those, you'll win a fabulous prize.
My boy, I'd love to give you that.
Okay, maybe not, but here at Into the Dust, we are eager to add our own $64,000 P word, and that would be palimpsest. Now, I know that sounds like some kind of a deviant sexual activity, but I promise you it's a lot more cerebral than that. Palimpsest is a term borrowed from textual studies, which basically examines old documents and manuscripts. Now, back in the day, paper was really expensive because, well, it wasn't paper. It was parchment or vellum, which is made out of animal skin. And it took a lot to write it because most people were illiterate, so labor was expensive. And that animal skin required a lot of manual labor to get ready for writing to begin with. Some of my favorite examples of these: there's the Lindisfarne Gospels, which you can see at the British Library in London, or the Book of Kells at Trinity College Library in Dublin, or a very obscure one, the Voynich manuscript at the Beinecke Library at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. Anyway, parchment was extremely expensive, so for more common writing, not these fancy illuminated manuscripts I just showed you, the parchment was reused. Now, how did they do this? It's not like they could just use an eraser. Well, they simply scraped off the writing. Remember, parchment is made of animal skin, so it's a lot more robust than paper. They scraped off that top layer and they wrote over it. This worked, but it created kind of a messy finish, with layers and layers of writing superimposed and half scraped off. Well, anyway, what does all this have to do with archaeology? Well, there's a common fallacy in archaeology that I believed I discussed once before, which is called the Pompeii premise. Now, the Pompeii premise is the mistaken idea that this site that you found is basically a site that was frozen in time and left just sort of as it was abandoned, and you're finding that time and place right now. Now, it's of course named after the city of Pompeii, which was destroyed in an eruption of Mount Vesuvius, leaving people, artwork, food, right as it was left before the volcano blew its top. Well, this almost never happens in archaeology. After a site is abandoned, you have all kinds of natural processes like decomposition, flooding, natural accumulation of silt and sediment. Then you have activity by animals and people. So what you're left with looks very, very different than the site as it was abandoned. So most sites really represent layers and layers of what we call stratigraphy. That would be, well, a layer of deposit that represents a specific time period. But in many sites, these layers are not neat like a cake. They're all mixed together in a big mess.
I need to taste this wonderful cake.
And that, my friends, is what is known as an archaeological palimpsest. And decoding these palimpsests is either a nightmare or a lot of fun, depending on how you look at it. And what are some examples of archaeological palimpsests? Well, caves, they usually provide great examples of this. For example, a cave I've discussed a few times is that cave in Poland, Zadawa Skala Cave, where that bear bone carved by the Neanderthals was found. This cave had layers and layers of stratigraphy covering tens of thousands of years, representing dozens of species and human activity as well. Actually, though, perhaps this isn't the best example of a palimpsest because, believe it or not, even looking at this complex diagram, this cave, as cave archaeology goes, was considered relatively straightforward, meaning the layers were reasonably clear to tell apart. In many cases, what you have is animals living and dying and killing each other in caves, people living in caves, which includes doing things like preparing food, building fires, also dying in the cave. You have people killing animals in the caves, or maybe they're animals killing people. You just don't know. And what's left behind is a mess of unstratified sediments like this here. So it's often near impossible to figure out what's going on there. Were these the animals killing the people killing the animals? Were they actually unrelated? The remains perhaps separated by hundreds or thousands of years, they just happen to occur in the same cave. So how do we figure all of this out? With difficulty, and with a lot of science and a lot of techniques. For example, radiocarbon dating is one. But remember, that can only date organics. There's other more complicated techniques for dating inorganics, like thermoluminescence. We discussed that one way back when I presented that ancient carpentry story. There's micromorphology. There's infrared microspectrometry. There's microspectroscopy. Stuff way too complicated to get into now. In terms of more familiar techniques, there's experimental archaeology, to try to figure out how this stuff may have accumulated over time through human activity, for example. There's wet sifting, to try to separate out the different densities and types of materials, or you could even use a centrifuge for that. Anyway, you get the idea. Palimpsests are tough, and they don't just occur in caves. Some other common examples, like campsites where hunter-gatherers return seasonally year after year.
At night, they settle down to camp wherever their wanderings have brought them. They may stay here for a few days, laughing and gossiping, hunting and food gathering until the area is exhausted, and then will move on.
Or in buildings that were abandoned and then squatted in. I see that quite a bit in my line of work in early medieval Britain, where you had these sumptuous Roman villas that were abandoned and then reused in early medieval times, often for very mundane purposes like keeping animals. Anyway, you get the idea. Archaeological sites are often messy and very difficult to unpick. They're palimpsests, which is sort of the bane of archaeologists, but it also keeps them employed, so can't complain too much. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.